Get one final question. Essen in Hammersmith. You're on the radio. Go ahead, Essen.
Hi, Mr. Brown, would you get in the back of a cab whose driver's been working for about 20 or 24 hours?
Well, I would rather not, I guess, is the answer to that.
Why do you ask that, Essen?
The reason is, at the moment, because Uber prices have gone so cheap, the cab drivers can't seem to make ends meet. So they're having to work for 20, 24 hours, sometimes longer. And there's no way of ensuring that these guys this is becoming a public safety issue. If you go through social media, it's more and more abundant that drivers are working stupid hours. And look, you've got truck drivers, train drivers, and pilots on time limits.
Yes.
Why not cab drivers? I mean, there's plenty of examples on the media where people are getting into... I mean, I know a guy who said to a cab driver to stop, and he will drive his car to the airport because he was so scared that he was going to die along the way.
How could this be? How do you think this could be regulated? Briefly, before we get Mr. Brown's view, Essen.
Well, one company and one driver. That's the only way that these cab drivers, because at the moment they're switching on and off apps between cab companies, and this is
so better. I see better registration of the drivers. So if you work for Ferrari cabs, you work for Ferrari cabs or whatever, or you work for Uber, and that's it.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, so I do have a lot of sympathy for that point. I think you've got to make sure that you get into a cab that it's safe, that you're going to have a driver that you can rely on. But these are very difficult things to enforce. There's been years, decades of enforcement for things like tachographs and other things in HGV vehicles. I've seen some of that work in practice. But there are very clear regulations for train drivers and airline pilots, as the caller so eloquently said.
You just need to hook up the car. You just see a number plate and it just takes you straight through to Ferrari cabs or LBC cabs or Uber. Look, how hard is that?
Well, I think it's a good point. I think this is something we should have a look at. I think it is a concern, obviously, and we've got to look at this. I mean, look, this whole issue, Nick, as has been identified again this morning with the number of calls on this subject, is a very, very difficult minefield of issues to get through. Because on the one hand, you want to encourage, the free market. You want to encourage entrepreneurs to be able to set up their cab business and earn a decent living.
I can't understand why you don't have a better... For instance, we've been working on the tragedy of the child who was killed in Hyde Park. Terrible story.
Yeah, terrible.
And one of our journalists contacted TfL, and TfL told them yesterday they would not be able to tell us which company operated the minicab because they did not have that information. Yeah. Why don't you have that information?
Well, it's to do with what TfL actually does, and there's a difference between regulating the thing overall and being absolutely intrusively involved in every minute detail of a private operator. No, I know, but it is. But it's.
If LBC had a fleet of company cars, they would know which journalists had the car. But you've got these guys driving. You don't even know who the car owns.
But they're not our cars. They're not our cars, Nick.
No, but you license them.
That's a fundamental difference. It's a bit like saying to the DVLA that they will know every single issue of every single car. They don't. I mean, these.
No, but if I am applying for hire or whatever it's called in London and I'm authorised by TfL, is it that much to expect that alongside Nick Ferrari, it's labelled that I work for Leicester Square Cabs?
Well, then that's exactly why, as I said right at the front of this slot half an hour ago, that actually the reality is that now the change in regulation will allow us to ensure that we actually have a link between the operator, the vehicle and the driver. That's a step forward. It won't solve all the problems, but I do believe it's quite an important step forward, and clearly, we want to continue to make progress in this area. This is obviously an area of concern for Londoners, and we've got to try and see what we can do to make it better.